What made you realize your family was never going to change? The text from Mom came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Grandma Rose passed. Funeral Saturday. Don't embarrass us. I stared at my phone screen in the darkness of my Seattle apartment, waiting for something that felt like grief to hit me. Instead, all I could think about was that last part. Don't embarrass us, not we're sorry for your loss, or she loved you, or even basic information about arrangements. Just a preemptive strike wrapped in 12 words. Grandma Rose had been the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I mattered. She was the one who taught me to code when I was 14, hunched over her ancient desktop computer in her kitchen while she made pierogies from scratch. Sarah, she'd say, smart girls like you don't need anyone's permission to succeed. She was the one who sent me birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, even after Mom told her to stop spoiling me. She was the one who called me every Sunday until 3 months ago, when the dementia finally took that away too. I booked a flight to Cleveland for Thursday morning. 5 days should be enough to handle whatever fresh hell awaited me at 1247 Maple Street, the house where I'd spent 18 years learning that love was conditional and I'd apparently never met the conditions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was flying back to mourn the one family member who'd actually mourned when I left. When I'd gotten into Carnegie Mellon for computer science, Mom's first comment was about the debt. When I landed my first job at Microsoft straight out of college, making $147,000 a year, Dad asked why I couldn't have gotten a job closer to home. When I got promoted to senior engineer last year, they forgot to even acknowledge the email I sent. But when my brother Jake dropped out of community college for the third time to pursue his music career, they bought him a $3,000 guitar and turned the basement into a studio. When he got arrested for drunk driving, Dad hired him a lawyer and Mom told everyone he'd been set up. When he moved back home at 26 with no job and no prospects, they called it finding himself. The plane descended through gray October clouds, and Cleveland sprawled below me like a reminder of everything I'd escaped. I'd been gone for 10 years, visited maybe 6 times, and each trip felt like willingly stepping back into quicksand. But this time felt different. This time, the person who'd made those visits bearable was gone. I picked up my rental car and drove the familiar route through neighborhoods that had grown shabbier, past the high school where I'd been invisible, past the Dairy Queen where Jake had worked for exactly 2 weeks before quitting. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the brown paint peeling near the gutters, Dad's truck in the driveway next to a car I didn't recognize. I sat in the rental for 5 full minutes, watching the house where nothing ever changed except me, and I always changed back. My phone buzzed. Jake, Mom's losing her shit about the seating arrangements. Says you better not make this about you. I hadn't even walked through the door yet. I knocked on the front door, which felt surreal since I'd lived here for 18 years, but I'd learned that walking in uninvited was somehow presumptuous and attention-seeking, according to Mom's last Christmas lecture. The door swung open before I could knock twice. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Jake said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked exactly the same shaggy brown hair, same cocky smirk, same wrinkled band t-shirt that probably hadn't been washed in a week. Nice of you to show up. Nice to see you too, Jake. He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. Mom, he yelled toward the kitchen. Your favorite daughter's here. I'd forgotten how much venom he could pack into a joke. The house smelled like pine sol and something burning. Family photos lined the hallway, Jake's high school graduation, Jake playing guitar at some dive bar, Jake with his arm around a succession of girlfriends. There was exactly one photo of me, college graduation, tucked between a picture of their neighbor's dog and a Olin Mills portrait from 1987. Mom emerged from the kitchen wearing a black dress I recognized from my high school graduation and an expression I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that said I'd already disappointed her and I'd been here less than 30 seconds. Sarah. She looked me up and down like I was a restaurant meal she was about to send back. You couldn't dress appropriately. I glanced down at my black slacks and navy blazer. I just got off a plane, Mom. I brought other clothes. Your hair's different. I got it cut 6 months ago. It's very short. This was how it always started. The slow, methodical picking apart of everything about me, delivered in a tone that sounded concerned but felt like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Dad appeared from the living room, beer in hand even though it wasn't even 3 p.m. There she is. How's the computer business? Software engineering. It's good. Must be nice, sitting at a desk all day. He settled into his recliner like punctuation at the end of the conversation. Jake, show your sister where she's sleeping, Mom said, already walking away. Jake led me upstairs to what used to be my bedroom, which had been converted into a home office/storage room. A twin air mattress sat on the floor between boxes labeled Jake stuff and a desk covered in Mom's scrapbooking supplies. 5-star accommodations, Jake said. Just like old times. I dropped my bag next to the air mattress. Through the thin wall, I could hear Mom on the phone. She looks tired. Too skinny. You know how she gets when she's stressed, dramatic about everything. I'd been here 45 minutes. So, Jake said, sitting on the edge of the desk, Mom's worried you're going to make some kind of scene at the funeral. You're not going to do anything weird, are you? Like what? I don't know. Cry too much. Talk about how Grandma Rose was the only one who understood you. That victim stuff you used to pull. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a slap. Victim stuff. Come on, Sarah. We all know Grandma Rose felt sorry for you because you were so. He gestured vaguely at me. Intense. But don't make her funeral about your therapy sessions or whatever. I stared at him, this person who'd never worked a real job, never paid rent, never faced a consequence he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of, telling me not to make things about myself. Got it, I said quietly. He grinned. Cool. Dinner's at 6. Try not to mention your salary, okay? It's tacky. That evening at dinner, I met the newest addition to the family dynamics, Brittany, Jake's girlfriend of, for months, who had somehow earned a seat at the table while I got the air mattress. She was 22, worked part-time at a nail salon, and had already moved into Jake's basement bedroom. Sarah's the smart one, Mom announced while passing around a casserole that was somehow both burnt and undercooked. Makes all that money up in Seattle. Brittany's eyes lit up. Oh cool. What do you do? I'm a software engineer at. She works with computers, Jake interrupted, shooting me a warning look across the table. Dad carved the ham with more aggression than necessary. Course, all that education cost a fortune. Still paying those loans off, I bet. I'd paid off my student loans 3 years ago, but correcting him would be showing off. Jake's really talented though, Mom continued, as if we were in some kind of competition. You should hear the song he wrote about Grandma Rose. He's going to play it at the service. This was news to me. You're performing at the funeral. It's not performing, Jake said. It's called honoring her memory. Something heartfelt. You wouldn't understand. Brittany squeezed his arm. It's so beautiful. It made me cry. What's it about? I asked. Jake's jaw tightened. About how she was always there for our family. How she kept us all together. About love and sacrifice. I nearly choked on my green bean casserole. Jake had visited Grandma Rose exactly twice in the past 5 years. Both times, he'd asked her for money, once for recording equipment and once to help with his DUI lawyer fees. The last time I talked to her, she'd asked me why Jake never called anymore. That sounds lovely, I managed. After dinner, while everyone watched TV, I called my friend Marcus from the back porch. He'd been my roommate at Carnegie Mellon and understood the specific hell of family dysfunction. How bad is it? He asked without preamble. I've been here 6 hours and I'm already planning my escape route. Want me to call you with a fake emergency? I considered it. Maybe. They've got Jake performing at the funeral. Apparently I'm expected to just sit there and pretend the past 10 years didn't happen. What would your grandma want you to do? That was the question, wasn't it? Grandma Rose had never been one to suffer fools, but she'd also never been one to cause unnecessary pain. She'd navigated this family for 43 years before Dad married into it, watching her son turn into someone she barely recognized and her grandchildren get sorted into categories like produce at a grocery store. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Jake on the couch, Brittany curled up next to him while Mom brought them ice cream. Dad was explaining something about the Browns' latest loss. It was a tableau of domestic contentment that I'd never been part of, even when I lived here. My phone rang. Mom, calling from inside the house. Sarah. We're discussing the funeral arrangements. Could you come in? I found them arranged in the living room like a tribunal. Jake had his guitar out, tuning it with the focused attention he'd never given to anything else in his life. We've got the order of service figured out, Mom said, consulting a legal pad covered in her careful handwriting. Pastor Williams will do the opening, then Jake's song, then remarks from family friends, then closing prayers. I waited for my part in this plan. The silence stretched. Where do I fit in? I finally asked. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, one of those married couple conversations that happen without words. Well, Mom said carefully, we thought maybe you could do one of the readings. Something from scripture. What about the eulogy? Jake's song is the eulogy, Dad said. More personal that way. And there it was. Even in death, even in grief, the hierarchy remained unchanged. I felt something crack inside my chest, not quite breaking, but definitely fracturing. Jake's song is the eulogy. It's more meaningful, Mom said, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining why I couldn't have things. Music touches people in ways that words can't. Words were literally Grandma Rose's profession. She taught high school English for 37 years. Jake looked up from his guitar. Yeah, and she always said I got the creative genes in the family. That was a lie, and we all knew it. Grandma Rose had spent countless hours helping me with writing assignments, telling me I had a gift for language and encouraging me to keep a journal. She'd been a published poet before she became a teacher, 3 poems in Literary Midwest magazine in the 1960s. She'd shown them to me when I was 16, yellowed pages tucked carefully in a photo album. Besides, Mom continued, Jake knew her better. He has more stories. The unfairness of it was breathtaking. I talked to her every Sunday for 10 years. Phone calls aren't the same as being here, Dad said without looking away from the TV. I thought about those Sunday calls, how Grandma Rose would update me on her garden, ask about my projects at work, remember details about my life that my parents forgot within minutes. How she'd started each call the same way, there's my Seattle girl. Tell me something good. 3 months ago, the calls had gotten confused. She'd started forgetting I'd moved away, asking when I was coming home from school. The last coherent conversation we'd had, she'd whispered, Sarah, honey, promise me you won't let them make you small again. Jake's been here helping with her care, Mom said. Taking her to appointments, fixing things around her house. This was news to me. Since when? Since August, Jake said, suddenly very interested in his guitar strings. Been going over there twice a week. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my text thread with Grandma Rose's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd been updating me on Grandma's condition. According to her messages, the only family member who'd been regularly visiting was Mom, and only after the dementia got bad enough that Adult Protective Services had called. Mrs. Chen never mentioned seeing you there, I said. Jake's fingers stilled on the frets. Who's Mrs. Chen? Her next-door neighbor. The one who's been checking on her for the past year. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's legal pad crinkled as her grip tightened. The point is, Dad said loudly, we've got everything handled. Pastor Williams knows what we want. What we want, or what Grandma Rose wanted. Mom's voice sharpened. Sarah, don't start. Start what? Asking questions. Caring about what she actually would have wanted. She would have wanted her family to come together, Jake said, setting down his guitar. Not turn her funeral into some kind of drama. But I was thinking about the last time I'd visited, 18 months ago. Grandma Rose had pulled me aside in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she taught me to code, where she told me stories about growing up during the Depression, where she'd listened to me cry about feeling invisible in my own family. Sarah, she'd said, gripping my hands with fingers that were still strong despite her 83 years, I worry about you carrying all this anger. But I worry more about you not carrying enough of it. At the time, I hadn't understood what she meant. Now, sitting in this living room where my grief apparently mattered less than keeping up appearances, I was starting to figure it out. Fine, I said, standing up. Jake can do the eulogy. Mom visibly relaxed. Good. I think that's what's best for everyone. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. Just out of curiosity, what's the song about? Specifically. Jake picked up his guitar again. Just, family stuff. How she was always there for us. Can you play a little bit? I'd love to hear it. The look of panic that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know. Jake glanced at Mom, then back at his guitar. It's not really finished yet. Still working on some of the verses. But you said it made Brittany cry. Brittany suddenly became very interested in her acrylic nails. Well, I mean, the parts one heard were really moving. What parts were those? I kept my voice light, curious rather than confrontational. It was a trick I'd learned in code reviews. Sometimes the best way to expose a bug was to just keep asking innocent questions. Jake's fingers found a few random chords. Look, I don't like performing unfinished work, okay? You wouldn't understand, it's an artist thing. Try me. What's one line you've written so far? The silence stretched long enough for Dad's beer commercial to start and finish. Mom was gripping her legal pad so tight I could see the veins in her hands. You know what, Sarah? Jake set the guitar aside with more force than necessary. This is exactly the kind of thing Mom was worried about. You've been here one day and you're already interrogating everyone. I asked to hear one line of a song about our grandmother. It's the tone, Mom said, and there it was, the accusation that had followed me my entire childhood. My tone was too sharp, too questioning, too much. You have this way of making everything sound like an attack. I thought about my team at work, how they came to me with problems because I was thorough, because I asked the right questions, because I didn't let issues slide until they became catastrophes. My boss had literally written excellent analytical skills and attention to detail in my last performance review. But here, those same qualities made me difficult. I'm going to bed, I said. It's 8:30, Dad pointed out. Long day. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard Mom's voice, pitched just loud enough for me to hear. She's already starting. I knew this would happen. In my old room, I inflated the air mattress and tried not to think about the fact that Jake's girlfriend of 4 months had a permanent bedroom while I got camping equipment. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, so sorry about Rose. She talked about you every day. When is service, I realized no one had told me the actual time or location. I texted back, Saturday, but I don't know the details yet. Can I call you tomorrow, Her response came immediately, of course. Have something Rose wanted you to have, At 11:47 p.m., I crept downstairs for water and heard voices from Jake's basement bedroom. The heating vent carried sound better than anyone realized, something I discovered when I was 12 and desperate to understand why my parents always seemed angry with me. Can't believe she's trying to cause problems already. Mom's voice. What did you expect? Jake replied. She's been looking for an excuse to make this all about her since Grandma got sick. The song thing was smart, Brittany chimed in. Really puts her in her place. My hand froze on the refrigerator door. I just hope she doesn't try to speak anyway, Mom continued. You know how she gets when she feels slighted. Remember Christmas 3 years ago? I remembered Christmas 3 years ago. I'd mentioned that I'd gotten promoted and would be leading a team of 12 engineers. Dad had changed the subject to Jake's new job at Guitar Center, which he'd held for exactly 3 weeks. She won't say anything, Jake said confidently. Sarah always backs down. She'll read whatever scripture Mom picks and keep her mouth shut. I don't know, Mom sounded worried. She's different now. More, confrontational. She's the same as she always was, Jake said. She just makes more money now so she thinks she's better than us. I stood in the dark kitchen, holding a glass of water I no longer wanted, listening to my family dissect my character like pathologists examining a specimen. The casual certainty in Jake's voice, Sarah always backs down, hit me like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding. Because he was right. I always had backed down. Every holiday argument, every casual insult, every time they rewrote history to make themselves more comfortable, I'd swallowed my words and kept the peace. But as I climbed the stairs back to my air mattress, I found myself thinking about something else Grandma Rose had told me during that last visit. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is stop enabling their worst behavior. The next morning, I drove to Grandma Rose's house before anyone else was awake. I still had her spare key, she'd given it to me during my last visit, pressing it into my palm with a conspiratorial wink. Just in case, she'd said. You never know when you might need a place to think. The house sat quiet and still on Elm Street, her ancient Buick in the driveway with a thin layer of October leaves scattered across the windshield. Mrs. Chen saw me from her kitchen window and hurried over in her bathrobe, clutching a manila envelope. Sarah, honey, she said, embracing me with surprising strength for someone barely 5 feet tall. I'm so sorry. She loved you so much. Thank you for taking care of her. Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. I tried. Those last few months. I called your parents when she started forgetting to eat, forgetting to take her pills. Your mother came by maybe twice a week after that, just to check basics. But your brother? She shook her head. I never saw him until 2 weeks ago, and that was just to look around the house with some woman. My stomach dropped. Look around. Had a measuring tape. The woman was writing things down in a notebook. When I asked Jake what they were doing, he said they were assessing what needed to be handled. Made it sound like Rose was already gone. She handed me the envelope. Rose gave this to me 3 months ago, when she was having one of her clear days. Made me promise to give it to you after. She was very specific, just you, not the family. Inside was a key I didn't recognize and a note in Grandma Rose's careful handwriting, safety deposit box 247, First National Downtown. What's in there is for you. Don't let them guilt you into sharing what you don't want to share. Love, Grandma Rose, I let myself into her house, and the familiar smell of lavender and old books nearly brought me to my knees. Everything was exactly as I remembered: her reading chair by the window, the kitchen table where we'd spent hours working on code, the refrigerator still covered in newspaper clippings she'd saved about women in technology. But there were things missing. The silver candy dish that had belonged to her mother. The small landscape painting she'd inherited from her sister. The antique jewelry box that had always sat on her bedroom dresser. I called the bank. Safety deposit box access required death certificate and identification, and the funeral director wouldn't have the official certificate until Monday. But the bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, remembered me from when Grandma Rose had brought me in to open my first savings account at 16. She added you as a co-holder on the box 6 months ago, she said quietly. Updated her will at the same time. You can access it anytime. When I got back to Maple Street, Jake's car was gone, but Mom was in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing dishes that looked already clean. Where were you? She asked without looking up. Grandma Rose's house. Her hands stilled. Why? Wanted to see it one more time. Pay my respects. Well, you shouldn't have gone alone. The neighborhood's gotten rough. I'd driven through tree-lined streets with Halloween decorations and minivans. Seemed fine to me. Jake's been handling all that, Mom said, returning to her unnecessary scrubbing. The house stuff. Making sure everything's secure. What needs to be secured? You know, valuables. Important papers. Things that could go missing. I thought about the empty spaces I'd noticed, the missing items that had been part of Grandma Rose's life for decades. What kind of things have gone missing? Mom's shoulders tensed. Nothing's gone missing, Sarah. We're just being careful. Some of her jewelry, a few family pieces, Jake moved them somewhere safe until after the funeral. Somewhere safe like where? I don't know the details. That's between Jake and the estate lawyer. But Grandma Rose had been sharp about her finances even as the dementia progressed. She'd shown me her will during my last visit, written in clear language that left everything to be divided equally between her grandchildren, me and Jake. No mention of parents getting control of anything first. Mom, who's the executor of her will? The dish in her hand slipped, clattering against the sink. Why are you asking all these questions? Because she was my grandmother too. Jake's handling the legal aspects. He's been dealing with everything for months now. It's very complicated. Since when is Jake qualified to handle legal aspects of anything? Mom whirled around, sudsy hands dripping. Since when did you become so suspicious of your own family? This is exactly what I was worried about. You can't just sweep in here after years of barely visiting and start making accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions. It's the same thing with you, Sarah. Always has been. You can't just trust that we have everything handled. You have to pick everything apart until you find something wrong. But I wasn't 16 anymore, desperate for approval and willing to accept any explanation that kept the peace. I was 28, successful, and tired of pretending that asking reasonable questions made me the problem. I want to see the will, I said. That's between Jake and the lawyer. I'm named in it. I have a right to see it. Mom's face flushed red. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you find out things aren't exactly what you expected them to be. The bank's fluorescent lights felt harsh against my skin as Mrs. Rodriguez led me to the safety deposit box room. My hands shook slightly as I inserted both keys, mine and the bank's, into box 247. Inside was a thick manila folder, a small wooden jewelry box, and an envelope marked, "For Sarah's eyes only," in Grandma Rose's unmistakable handwriting. I opened the folder first. Copies of bank statements, investment accounts, and a will dated 6 months ago, not the one Jake apparently had. According to these documents, Grandma Rose had assets worth nearly $340,000, including the house, her savings, and an investment account I'd never known about. The will was crystal clear, everything split equally between her 2 grandchildren, with me named as executor. But there was more. A letter from Grandma Rose's lawyer, dated 8 weeks ago, expressing concern about irregular access to Mrs. Kowalski's accounts and requesting a meeting to clarify recent transactions. Attached were bank statements showing 3 withdrawals in the past 2 months, $2,800, $1,500, and $4,200. All signed by someone with power of attorney. The wooden jewelry box contained her mother's engagement ring, her sister's pearls, and a small silver locket I remembered from childhood. But underneath the jewelry was a folded piece of paper, a power of attorney document giving Jake full access to her finances, dated 3 months ago. The signature looked like Grandma Rose's, but the handwriting was shaky, uncertain. This was after her dementia diagnosis, after she'd stopped remembering what day it was half the time. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. My dearest Sarah. Asterisk, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I hope I managed to get this to you before Jake figured out what I was doing. My mind isn't what it used to be, but I still have moments of clarity, and during one of them I realized what was happening, asterisk. Asterisk, 3 months ago, Jake came to visit with papers for me to sign. He said they were to help me manage my bills, that your parents were worried about me forgetting things. I signed them because I was having a bad day and everything seemed so confusing. But later, when my head was clearer, I realized what I'd done, asterisk. Asterisk, I tried to revoke the power of attorney, but my lawyer said I'd need to prove I was competent, and some days I'm not sure I am. So I did this instead. I moved what I could into accounts Jake doesn't know about and made sure you'd have access to the truth, asterisk. Asterisk, the withdrawals he's been making aren't for my care. Mrs. Chen told me your mother mentioned Jake was getting an advance on his inheritance to help with some debts. I don't know what debts, but I know this isn't what I wanted, asterisk. Asterisk, I'm telling you this not to hurt anyone, but because you're the only one who ever asked me what I actually wanted instead of just assuming you knew. Remember what I taught you about debugging code? Sometimes you have to trace every line to find where the logic breaks down, asterisk. Don't let them make you feel guilty for wanting the truth. All my love. Grandma Rose. Asterisk P.S. Check the transaction on September 15th. That's the day Jake bought himself a new truck, asterisk. I sat in that sterile bank room, staring at documents that proved everything I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. Jake hadn't been taking care of Grandma Rose, he'd been taking care of himself. The touching eulogy, the song about family love, the lectures about not making her funeral about myself, it was all cover for the fact that he'd been systematically draining her accounts while she was too confused to stop him. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom, *, where are you? Visitation starts at 2. Don't be late, *. I looked at my watch, 1:15 p.m. In 45 minutes, I'd be sitting in a funeral home listening to people talk about what a wonderful grandson Jake was, how devoted he'd been to Grandma Rose in her final months. The same people who'd watch him perform his heartfelt musical tribute tomorrow at the funeral. I photographed every document, uploaded them to my secure cloud storage, and carefully placed everything back in the safety deposit box. But I kept one thing, the power of attorney document with its suspicious signature. I had questions about that signature, and I knew someone who might have answers. The funeral home parking lot was already half full when I arrived. I spotted Jake's truck immediately, a gleaming black Ford F-150 with temporary plates. According to Grandma Rose's bank records, he'd paid $34,000 cash for it on September 15th. The same day he'd withdrawn $35,000 from her investment account. I sat in my rental car for several minutes, watching my family members file into Morrison and Son's funeral home. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, family friends who'd known Grandma Rose since the 1960s, neighbors who genuinely cared about her. All of them about to spend the next 2 hours celebrating the memory of a woman whose own grandson had stolen from her while she was dying. But I wasn't 16 anymore, sitting silently while everyone else rewrote reality to suit their comfort. I had documentation, bank records, and a letter written in my grandmother's own hand explaining exactly what had happened. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I walked into Morrison and Son's funeral home carrying a purse that contained copies of bank statements, a fraudulent power of attorney, and my grandmother's final letter. The weight of it felt heavier than my laptop bag ever had, even during my worst crunch periods at Microsoft. The viewing room was decorated in soft pastels and filled with flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's rent. Jake stood near the casket in a black suit I'd never seen before, accepting condolences with the practiced grief of someone who'd been rehearsing. Brittany hovered beside him in a dress that was somehow both too tight and too short for a funeral, but nobody seemed to be policing her appearance. There you are, Mom materialized at my elbow, her voice pitched low but sharp. Mrs. Patterson has been asking about you. Go say hello. Mrs. Patterson had been Grandma Rose's neighbor for 20 years before moving to Florida. She enveloped me in a hug that smelled like White Shoulders perfume and hairspray. Sarah, honey, your grandmother was so proud of you. Always bragging about her computer genius granddaughter. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. She showed me the article about your company in Fortune magazine. Kept it copyright on her kitchen counter. I'd forgotten about that article, a small mention of our team's work on cloud security. I'd sent her the link, never imagining she'd printed it out. She was so excited about your promotion too, Mrs. Patterson continued. Said you were going to be managing a whole department of engineers. My Sarah's going places, she'd say. The past tense hit me like a physical blow. All those Sunday phone calls, all those conversations about my work that my parents dismissed as just computers, Grandma Rose had been listening, remembering, celebrating victories that no one else in my family acknowledged. She talked about me. I asked. Every chance she got. Even after she started getting confused, she'd still light up when your name came up. Right up until the end, she knew who you were. This contradicted everything my family had told me about her final months. According to them, she hadn't recognized anyone, hadn't been capable of meaningful conversation. But Mrs. Patterson was describing someone who'd been aware enough to feel proud, aware enough to remember details about my career. Aware enough to know she was being robbed. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, when was the last time you saw her? Oh, about 6 weeks ago. I was visiting my sister in Akron and stopped by. She was having one of her good days, we had tea and she told me all about Jake's new truck. Mrs. Patterson's expression soured slightly. Though she seemed confused about how he'd afforded it. Kept asking if he'd gotten a new job. My stomach clenched. What did you tell her? Well, I didn't know what to say. Far as I knew, he was still living in your parents' basement. But she kept worrying about it, asking if maybe she'd forgotten lending him money. Sweet thing was so upset about her memory, I finally just told her maybe she had helped him and forgot. Seemed to calm her down. So Grandma Rose had known something was wrong. Even with dementia, some part of her had recognized that the numbers didn't add up. She'd been lucid enough to worry, lucid enough to question, but confused enough to doubt her own instincts. Sarah. Jake's voice boomed across the room. Come here, I want you to meet someone. He was standing with a thin man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable. This is David Brennan, Grandma's lawyer. David, my sister Sarah. Brennan shook my hand with the grip of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I'm sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. Thank you. I was hoping to speak with you about her estate. Jake's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. David's been working with me on all the legal stuff. Really complicated process. Actually, Brennan said, glancing between us, I've been meaning to reach out to you, Sarah. There are some discrepancies in the documentation that I'd like to clarify. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the funeral home's canned classical music. Jake's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. What kind of discrepancies? I asked. Perhaps we should discuss this after the services, Brennan said diplomatically. No, I said, my voice carrying further than I'd intended. Several conversations nearby paused. I'd like to know now. Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sarah, this isn't the time or place. But I was thinking about Grandma Rose sitting in her kitchen 6 weeks ago, confused and worried, asking Mrs. Patterson if she'd forgotten lending money to the grandson who'd been systematically cleaning out her accounts. I was thinking about her shaky signature on documents she'd signed during bad days, giving away control of assets she'd spent 70 years accumulating. Mr. Brennan, I said clearly, I have reason to believe my brother obtained power of attorney under questionable circumstances and has been making unauthorized withdrawals from my grandmother's accounts. The funeral home conversation stopped entirely. Even the classical music seemed to pause. Jake's face flushed red. Are you seriously doing this here? I have bank records showing $35,000 in withdrawals over the past 2 months, including the exact amount you paid cash for your truck. You've been investigating me. His voice cracked with indignation. At our grandmother's funeral. I've been trying to understand why someone who supposedly loved her so much needed to steal from her while she was dying. And there it was. The word I'd been avoiding, hanging in the air between us like smoke. The funeral home erupted in whispers and shocked murmurs. Jake's face went from red to white in seconds, and I could see him calculating damage control in real time. Sarah, you're clearly upset and not thinking straight. Mom appeared beside Jake like a shield wall forming. This is inappropriate and hurtful. What's inappropriate is Jake withdrawing $35,000 from a dementia patient's account to buy himself a truck, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should. Show them the power of attorney, I interrupted, pulling the document from my purse. September 12, 3 days after her neurologist officially diagnosed severe cognitive decline. Look at that signature and tell me it's consistent with her handwriting from before the dementia. Jake lunged for the paper, but I stepped back. I have copies. You had no right to go through her private documents, Dad's voice cut through the crowd. He'd materialized from somewhere near the guest book, beer breath and righteous anger. That's theft. Actually, as co-holder on her safety deposit box and named executor of her actual will, not the one Jake's apparently been working with, I had every right. Mr. Brennan's eyebrows shot up. You're listed as executor. I have documentation showing Jake as. Dated when? I asked. Brennan fumbled with his briefcase. Let me see. August 15th. The will I have is dated September 28th, witnessed and notarized. 6 weeks after Jake obtained his power of attorney. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I'd taken. It specifically revokes all previous wills and explicitly names me as executor, with a note that she was concerned about financial irregularities in her accounts. The crowd around us had grown. I could see cousins craning their necks, family friends pulling out their phones. Mrs. Patterson looked stricken, her hand pressed to her mouth. Jake's composure finally cracked. This is insane. You show up here after years of barely visiting, and suddenly you're some kind of detective? Grandma Rose was confused, Sarah. She forgot things, she signed things twice, she was confused enough that you could manipulate her into giving you access to her money, but lucid enough to write a detailed letter explaining exactly what you'd done. I kept my voice level, professional. She even told me which specific transaction to check. September 15th, Jake. The day you bought your truck. Brittany had been silent through this entire exchange, but now she grabbed Jake's arm. Baby, maybe we should just go. Oh, we're not going anywhere, I said. Because I have questions about other missing items too. Her mother's silver service. The landscape painting from her bedroom. The antique jewelry that was supposed to go to the granddaughters according to her written instructions from 2018. Mom's face had gone ashen. Those items are being kept safe until. Safe where? Jake's basement. Your house. Or have they already been appraised and sold? The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. I could see people in the crowd doing math, remembering conversations, putting together pieces they'd ignored before. Mr. Brennan stepped forward, his professional demeanor firmly in place. I think we need to postpone this discussion until we can review all the documentation in private. No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. I'm tired of private discussions that protect everyone except the person who was actually wronged. Grandma Rose is lying right there, and tomorrow Jake's going to get up at her funeral and perform some song about family love while wearing a suit bought with money he stole from her. Jake's hands clenched into fists. I took care of her when nobody else would. You took care of yourself, Jake. Just like always. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His face cycled through emotions, shock, rage, calculation, before settling on something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I had to take care of things. She was forgetting to pay bills, leaving the stove on. Then explain this. I pulled out another document from my purse, a copy of Grandma Rose's credit card statement from July. $473 at Guitar World. $612 at Jack Daniels Music. $890 at Sam Ash. I looked up at the growing crowd. All charged to her credit card while she was supposedly too confused to manage her own finances. Brittany's grip on Jake's arm loosened. Baby, you said you were buying her groceries with that card. The funeral home had gone dead silent except for the whisper of papers rustling as Mr. Brennan frantically searched through his briefcase. Mom stood frozen beside Jake, her mouth opening and closing without sound. And here's my personal favorite, I continued, pulling out one more statement. September 3rd. $218 at Victoria's Secret. I turned to Brittany. I'm guessing that wasn't for Grandma Rose's lingerie collection. Brittany dropped Jake's arm like it was on fire. You bought me those things with your grandma's money. It's not like that, Jake stammered. I was going to pay her back once. Once what? I pressed. Once she died and you inherited everything. Except you couldn't wait, could you? You needed the money now, so you convinced an 83-year-old woman with dementia to give you power of attorney, then spent 4 months treating her bank account like your personal ATM. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward from the crowd, her voice trembling with rage. Jake Kowalski, I sat with your grandmother 3 weeks before she died. She cried because she thought she was losing her mind, forgetting things that never happened. She kept apologizing for being such a burden on the family. Her voice broke. She died thinking she was crazy, when the truth was you were gaslighting a woman with dementia. The words gaslighting hit the room like a bomb. I watched faces in the crowd, cousins, family friends, people who'd known Jake since he was a kid, registering the full scope of what he'd done. Dad finally found his voice. This is all speculation, Anne. Mr. Kowalski. Mr. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos with professional authority. I need to see all parties in my office Monday morning at 9 a.m. This conversation ends now. He looked directly at Jake. And I'm obligated to inform you that if these allegations are substantiated, we're looking at potential elder abuse charges, not just civil matters. The word charges sucked all remaining air from the room. Jake's face went white. Charges? I'm her grandson. I was helping her. You were stealing from her, I said simply. And now everyone knows it. That's when Jake snapped. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows you're a vindictive bitch who can't stand that someone else was important to her. His voice cracked with desperation. You think because you make more money and live in your fancy city that you're better than us? Grandma Rose felt sorry for you, Sarah. Sorry that you were so cold and uptight that you couldn't even maintain a relationship with your own family. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking, but what struck me most was how automatic it felt, like he'd been rehearsing these exact words for years, waiting for the right moment to deploy them. Is that what you told her when you were forging her signature? I asked quietly. That I was cold and uptight. Is that how you justified stealing from an old woman who loved you? Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Because we both knew the truth now, and so did everyone else in that funeral home. The golden child had finally revealed exactly what his love was worth. The silence that followed Jake's outburst stretched like a held breath. I could see him realizing what he'd just done, screaming at me in a room full of witnesses, calling me a vindictive bitch at our grandmother's visitation. His eyes darted around the crowd, taking in the horrified faces of relatives who'd known him since childhood. I didn't mean, he started, but Mom cut him off. We're leaving, she announced, grabbing Jake's arm with white-knuckled fingers. This is inappropriate and disrespectful to Rose's memory. What's disrespectful, said a voice from the back of the room, is stealing from the woman we're here to honor. I turned to see Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, pushing through the crowd. I hadn't seen him in probably 5 years, but he looked exactly the same, gray beard, work clothes, the kind of permanent scowl that came from 30 years in construction management. Frank, stay out of this, Dad warned. Like hell I will. Frank's voice carried the authority of someone used to managing crews of difficult men. I've been wondering how Jake suddenly had money for that truck. Rose mentioned it to me last month, said she was worried about her memory because she couldn't remember lending him money, but he kept saying she had. My heart clenched. Another person Grandma Rose had confided in, another piece of evidence that she'd known something was wrong but had been too confused to trust her own instincts. She called me 2 weeks before she died, Frank continued, his voice getting louder. Crying because she thought she was going crazy. Said her bank statements didn't make sense but everyone kept telling her it was the dementia. He pointed directly at Jake. You made a dying woman think she was losing her mind to cover up your theft. Jake's face cycled through desperation and calculation. Uncle Frank, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand enough. I understand you're wearing a $500 suit to the funeral of a woman whose credit card you maxed out buying guitar equipment. The crowd murmured with fresh outrage. Brittany had backed away from Jake entirely, her face pale with what looked like genuine shock. Baby, is this all true? Brittany, let me explain. Is it true? She demanded. Jake's silence was answer enough. Brittany shook her head in disgust and pushed through the crowd toward the exit, her heels clicking against the funeral home's marble floor. I can't believe I moved in with someone who steals from his own grandma. Brittany, wait. Jake started after her, but Mr. Brennan stepped into his path. Mr. Kowalski, I strongly advise you to remain available for questioning and not leave the state without informing my office. The weight of that statement hit Jake visibly. His shoulders sagged as the reality of his situation began to sink in. This wasn't a family squabble anymore, it was potential criminal charges, possible jail time, and public humiliation in a town where everyone knew everyone. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. We're going home. Sarah, when you're done destroying your family, you know where to find us. But before they could leave, Mrs. Chen stepped forward from the crowd. I hadn't even seen her arrive, but there she was in her black dress and pearls, looking smaller than ever but radiating quiet fury. I have something to say, she announced in her accented English. Jake came to Rose's house 2 weeks ago with that girl and a man with a clipboard. They were measuring furniture, taking pictures. When I asked what they were doing, Jake said they were preparing for estate management. But Rose was still alive. The funeral home erupted in shocked whispers. Jake had been inventorying Grandma Rose's possessions while she was still breathing, planning the liquidation of her life with his girlfriend and what sounded like an appraiser or estate sale coordinator. You were planning to sell her things before she was even dead? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Because what could he possibly say to that? Mrs. Chen's revelation about Jake measuring furniture while Grandma Rose was still alive landed like a physical blow to everyone in the room. I watched Jake's face cycle through denial, panic, and finally a kind of desperate calculation that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Chen, you're confused, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he perfected over the years. We were just helping Grandma organize her things. She asked us to. Rose was having a bad day that day, Mrs. Chen replied firmly. She kept asking me who the people in her house were. She was scared, Jake. Your own grandmother was scared of you. The word scared hit the crowd like electricity. I could see people looking at Jake differently now, not as the grieving grandson, but as something much darker. That's enough, Dad stepped forward, his face red with anger and what I was beginning to recognize as panic. Mrs. Chen, you're an elderly woman who's confused about what she saw. I'm 81 years old and I see everything that happens on my street, Mrs. Chen shot back. I saw Jake coming and going for months, but only after Rose got sick. I saw him loading boxes into his truck 3 different times. And I saw him bring that appraiser back last Tuesday to look at Rose's piano. My blood went cold. The piano? Grandma Rose's baby grand piano had been her most prized possession, a 1967 Steinway she'd bought with her first year's teaching salary. She tried to teach me to play when I was little, and even though I'd been hopeless at it, she'd never given up. Music and mathematics aren't so different, Sarah, she'd say. Both require patience and precision. The piano's still there, Jake said quickly. Nothing's been sold. Yet, Mrs. Chen added pointedly. But that man took many pictures and measured everything. Jake told him the piano alone should bring $15,000. $15,000. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app, adding up the documented withdrawals, $35,000 for the truck, roughly $8,000 in credit card charges, plus whatever cash she'd been skimming from her grocery and medication money. We were looking at close to $50,000 in theft, with potentially another $30,000 or more in antiques and furniture he'd been planning to liquidate. Jesus Christ, Jake, Uncle Frank's voice cut through the murmurs. You weren't just stealing her money. You were planning to gut her entire estate. I was protecting family assets, Jake said, but his voice was getting higher, more desperate. Do you know what nursing home care costs? What if she'd lived another 2 years? There wouldn't have been anything left for anyone. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Jake had appointed himself judge and jury of how long our grandmother deserved to live comfortably, then systematically stolen from her while convincing her she was going crazy. So you decided to steal it before medical bills could? I asked. I decided to make sure the family didn't lose everything to some corporate nursing home. What family, Jake? My voice was getting louder, and I didn't care who heard. Because according to the will Grandma Rose actually wrote, everything was supposed to be split between her grandchildren. You were planning to steal my inheritance too. That landed hard. I could see cousins and family friends doing math, realizing that Jake's theft hadn't just hurt Grandma Rose, it had hurt me directly. The family dynamic they'd all been watching their entire lives, the golden child versus the overlooked daughter, had just revealed its true cost. Mr. Brennan stepped forward again, his professional composure intact but his voice deadly serious. Mr. Kowalski, I need to advise you that these allegations now include potential charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. Jake looked around the funeral home desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who might still be on his side. But the faces staring back at him ranged from disgusted to horrified to deeply sad. That's when he made his final mistake. Fine, he said, his voice cracking. You want to know the truth? Grandma Rose wasn't some saint you're all making her out to be. She was mean and bitter and she played favorites her whole life. She threw money at Sarah because Sarah was never around to see what she was really like day to day. At least I was honest about what I needed. The funeral home went dead silent. The silence after Jake's words felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. He'd just called our beloved grandmother mean and bitter at her own funeral in front of people who'd known and loved her for decades. Mrs. Patterson's gasp was audible from across the room. Jacob Kowalski, how dare you? But Jake was past caring about appearances now. The mask had finally slipped completely. You all want to pretend she was perfect. She told Sarah she was proud of her computer job, but she told me Sarah was cold and ungrateful. She said Sarah only called because she felt obligated, not because she actually cared. Each word felt like a knife, carefully aimed at the soft spots he knew would hurt most. But something about his tone, the practiced cruelty, the specific details, made me pause. When did she tell you that, Jake? What? When specifically did Grandma Rose tell you I was cold and ungrateful? Because according to Mrs. Chen, you barely visited until August. Jake's eyes darted around the room. I don't remember exactly when. I do, Mrs. Chen interjected. Rose talked about Sarah every time I saw her. Never said anything bad. Always worried Sarah worked too hard, always proud when Sarah called. Her voice hardened. Jake, you're lying about a dead woman to make yourself feel better about robbing her. That's not, I didn't. Jake was spiraling now, his usual smooth manipulation failing him completely. Uncle Frank stepped closer. You know what, kid? Even if Rose had said those things, which I don't believe for a second, it still wouldn't justify stealing $50,000 from an old woman with dementia. 50,000. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. She'd gone pale, staring at Jake like she was seeing him for the first time. That's conservative, I said, consulting my phone. Documented withdrawals, credit card fraud, and that's before we account for the missing antiques or whatever he was planning to make from the estate sale he was organizing while she was still alive. Dad had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he cleared his throat. The antiques aren't missing. They're at our house for safekeeping. Every eye in the room turned to him. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What antiques, Dad? Just, some of her mother's things. The silver service. A few pieces of jewelry. Jake thought they'd be safer at our house until after the funeral. When did Jake move them? Dad's silence stretched too long. Mom answered instead, her voice barely audible, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. When Grandma Rose was still alive but having more bad days than good ones. Jake hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been systematically looting her house with my parents' knowledge and cooperation. You knew, I said, the realization hitting me like ice water. You all knew what he was doing. We were protecting family assets, Mom said desperately. You don't understand how bad her confusion was getting. She was talking about giving things away to her neighbors, to the mailman. We had to. You had to steal from her before she could be generous with her own possessions. Mr. Brennan was writing furiously in a small notebook. Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski, I need to inform you that knowingly receiving stolen property is also a criminal offense. The room erupted in fresh whispers. This wasn't just Jake anymore, this was a family conspiracy to defraud an elderly woman with dementia. But what hit me hardest wasn't the scale of the theft. It was the realization that while I'd been calling Grandma Rose every Sunday, sharing my life and listening to hers, my entire family had been systematically betraying her trust. While I'd been hoping they might finally show genuine emotion at her funeral, they'd been planning how to divide up her stolen possessions. The song, I said suddenly, looking at Jake. There is no song about Grandma Rose, is there? His face told me everything I needed to know. You never wrote a eulogy because you can't think of a single genuine thing to say about someone you spent 4 months robbing blind. And in that moment, I realized exactly what I was going to do at tomorrow's funeral. The funeral home had mostly emptied by the time Mr. Brennan finished taking statements from witnesses. Jake sat alone in a corner chair, staring at his phone like it might provide escape routes. Mom and Dad huddled by the guest book, whispering urgently about damage control. The few remaining relatives clustered in small groups, their voices carrying fragments, never would have suspected. Poor Rose. Always thought something was off about that boy. I found myself standing beside Grandma Rose's casket, looking down at her peaceful face framed by white satin. She wore the blue dress she'd always saved for special occasions, her hands folded over the small silver cross she'd inherited from her own grandmother. Someone, probably the funeral director, had done her makeup to hide how thin she'd gotten in those final months, but I could still see the toll her last year had taken. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," I whispered to her still form. "I'm sorry I didn't know what they were doing to you." She knew you loved her. Mrs. Chen appeared beside me, her voice gentle. "That last month, even when she was confused about everything else, she always remembered your Sunday calls. My Sarah calls me every week," she'd tell me. "No matter how busy she gets with her important job." She was so proud. The words broke something loose in my chest. All those Sundays when I'd called dutifully but felt disconnected, worried that I wasn't doing enough, that I should visit more often. I'd never realized that those calls were highlights of her week, proof to her neighbors that someone still cared. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? The power of attorney document Jake had her sign, do you remember anything about that day?" Her face darkened. September 12th. I remember because it was the day after that terrible storm, and I was checking on everyone. Jake was there with some woman, not the girlfriend, someone older in a business suit. They had Rose at her kitchen table with papers spread out everywhere. My pulse quickened. What kind of woman? Professional looking. Had one of those leather folders. When I knocked to check if Rose's power was back on, Jake answered the door and said they were handling some paperwork and Rose was having a bad day, so she couldn't visit. A witness. Jake had brought a notary or lawyer to legitimize the power of attorney, but he'd made sure to do it on one of Grandma Rose's worst days when she'd be most confused and compliant. "Did you see the woman leave?" "Yes, but Jake walked her to her car. I heard him say something about keeping this simple and she doesn't need to be confused by too many details." The woman looked uncomfortable. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the power of attorney document I'd photographed. "Mrs. Chen, look at this signature. Does it look right to you?" She squinted at the screen, then shook her head decisively. "No." Rose's handwriting was still strong even when her mind wasn't good. "This looks shaky, uncertain. Like someone helped guide her hand. Assisted signature fraud. Another potential charge to add to Jake's growing legal problems." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw your mom's Facebook post about the family drama. You okay? I realized with a start that of course mom would be doing damage control on social media. I quickly opened Facebook and found her post from 20 minutes ago. Please pray for our family during this difficult time. Satan is using grief to turn us against each other. Some people would rather destroy a family than forgive past mistakes. Rose wouldn't want this. 43 comments already, mostly from church friends offering prayers and support. But a few people were asking pointed questions. What kind of mistakes? Is Sarah okay? What happened at the funeral home? Jake had commented too. Just want to honor Grandma's memory tomorrow. Some people are making this about money instead of love. She's looking down so sad right now. The manipulative self-pity was breathtaking. Even now, even after being caught red-handed, he was painting himself as the victim and me as the villain motivated by greed. I scrolled through more comments and found one that made my blood run cold. Aunt Linda, mom's sister from Toledo, Jake called me an hour ago. Said Sarah's having some kind of breakdown and making wild accusations. We're driving up tonight to help with damage control. Reinforcements were coming. By tomorrow morning, I'd be facing a united front of extended family members who'd been told I was mentally unstable and attacking poor grieving Jake out of spite. I looked back down at Grandma Rose's peaceful face and made a decision that would have terrified the 18-year-old me but felt crystal clear to the woman I'd become. "I'm going to tell them the truth tomorrow," I whispered to her. "All of it. Everything you wanted me to know, everything they tried to hide. I'm not backing down this time." Mrs. Chen squeezed my arm. "She'd be proud of you for fighting." As the last visitors filed out and the funeral home staff began their closing procedures, I realized something that should have scared me but somehow didn't. I was no longer hoping my family would change. I was no longer trying to manage their feelings or avoid their anger. Tomorrow, I was going to set them free to show exactly who they really were. The next morning, I sat in the funeral home's family room, watching my relatives filter in for Grandma Rose's service. Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul had indeed driven up from Toledo, flanking Mom and Dad like bodyguards. Jake wore his stolen money suit and practiced his grieving grandson expression in the mirror by the door. The extended family whispered in clusters, shooting me uncertain glances. At 10:47 a.m., Pastor Williams approached me with a Bible and a concerned smile. "Sarah, your mother mentioned you'd be doing the reading from Ecclesiastes. Such beautiful verses about there being a time for everything." I took the Bible but didn't open it. "Actually, Pastor Williams, there's been a change. I'll be giving the eulogy instead." His eyebrows shot up. "But I thought Jake was." "Jake doesn't have a song prepared," I said calmly. "Turns out he's been too busy with other things." From across the room, I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. Jake's head snapped up from his mirror consultation, his face already flushing red. "Sarah," Mom hissed, hurrying over. "We discussed this. Jake is giving the eulogy." "No, Mom. Jake is going to sit quietly while I tell everyone exactly who Grandma Rose really was and what she meant to this family." The family room went silent except for the funeral home's soft organ music drifting in from the chapel. I could see the calculation happening behind Jake's eyes, the same look he'd had when we were kids and he was deciding whether he could lie his way out of trouble. "You can't do this," he said, his voice tight with desperation. "Watch me." At 11 a.m. sharp, I walked to the podium in front of 127 people who'd come to honor Grandma Rose's memory. I saw Mrs. Chen in the third row, Uncle Frank's encouraging nod, Mrs. Patterson clutching tissues. Jake sat in the front row between Mom and Aunt Linda, his face pale but his jaw set in defiance. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I'm Sarah, Rose's granddaughter, and I want to tell you about the woman I knew and loved for 28 years. I told them about Sunday phone calls that lasted an hour, about a grandmother who remembered every detail of my career while my parents forgot I'd been promoted. I told them about peer and programming lessons, about birthday cards with $20 bills, about a woman who saw potential in an awkward teenage girl when no one else bothered to look. Then I told them about the bank statements. About power of attorney documents signed during dementia episodes. About $50,000 in theft disguised as caregiving. About Jake measuring furniture while she was still alive, planning estate sales while she worried she was losing her mind. Rose died thinking she was crazy, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. She spent her last months apologizing for being confused, for forgetting things that never happened, for being a burden to a family that was systematically robbing her blind. The chapel erupted in shocked murmurs. Jake started to stand, but Uncle Frank's hand on his shoulder pushed him back down. This is who Jake really is, I continued. This is who my parents really are. People who steal from dying women and then perform grief at their funerals. People who would rather destroy an old woman's peace of mind than get honest jobs. Jake shot to his feet. You're lying. Sit down, son, Uncle Frank's voice cut through the chapel like steel. You've done enough. I looked out at the crowd, at cousins finally understanding, at family friends seeing clearly, at a community realizing they'd been fooled by Jake's charm for years. Rose wanted me to tell you something, I said, pulling out her letter. She wrote this 3 months ago, when she realized what was happening but felt too confused to stop it. I read her words aloud, her voice speaking through mine about betrayal and theft and the grandson who'd gaslit her into doubting her own sanity. When I finished, the chapel was silent except for muffled sobs. This is what never changes, I said, looking directly at my parents. This is who you'll always be. And now everyone knows it. I walked out of that funeral home and drove straight to the airport, leaving them to face the community they tried so hard to fool. I never spoke to any of them again.